Hello.
Hello, and welcome to Spokane County Spotlight. I'm Commissioner Nancy McLaughlin, and my guests today are the Chair of the Spokane Salvation Army's Advisory Board, Kelly Ruggles, and our Business Administrator, Sheila Garrity. Welcome to Spokane County Spotlight.
Thank you.
Thank you both for joining me today, and I just want to give you both, first of all, congratulations on 125 years of the Salvation Army, not nationally, but just here in Spokane. Right. Before we get into kind of what's going on with the Salvation Army, I'd like to ask you both just to introduce yourselves and how you kind of fit into the Salvation Army plan and why you love this wonderful organization. So let's start with the chair of our advisory board, Kelly Ruggles. Welcome.
Well, welcome. Thank you. And I always say that chairs, it sounds a lot more important than it really is. It was basically my turn. The Salvation Army, I've been on the board for a number of years, and I actually am very passionate about the Salvation Army and the way that they work. And the programs in Spokane or around the world, really. The Salvation Army now is, I think, at 120 some countries, but our local presence is tremendous. And we have a great organization with people like Sheila that work there, and also our board, and how many people we serve in the city and the county. So, like I said, I'm passionate about the programs that we run and the good that we do.
Well, I appreciate your leadership because I've also been on the advisory board for just a few years anyways, but it's with the compassion and the leadership that you provide, Kelly, that helps and everything. So we appreciate that a lot. And Sheila, you are one of the mainstays because majors come and go.
Right.
But as a business administrator, you're actually kind of the glue that helps hold our local core together. So share a little bit about what you do and why you're here and a part of the Salvation Army.
Right, Nancy, I've been with the Salvation Army for 8 years now, and I have had to changing of the guard, so to speak. It is an Army format, so they do move on, and they move on just like the military does. And the Salvation Army opened my eyes to things I'd never seen before. I was in the corporate world for about 20 years and came off, and I was on the Salvation Army board myself. And when this job position came open, I just jumped at the chance to see a different part of the world, which is the nonprofit social services world.
Yeah. Well, recently I had the pleasure, I know you were both there, we had a 125th anniversary dinner and celebrating our time here in Spokane, but we had it at Luigi's restaurant. And I found out, I didn't realize until I got there, that actually Luigi's, the histories of that building has actually close ties to the Salvation Army. So who wants to share a little bit about that?
Well, yes, Luigi's was the first building that the Salvation Army built in 1921 to bring all of our services together into one location. We had a hospital for unwed mothers, we had substance abuse treatment facilities all over Spokane. And so when we opened that in 1921, everything came together into one Red Shield Hotel, is what they called it at the time, for men suffering substance abuse to get some treatment.
Previous to that, there were other buildings. In fact, one of them actually burned down, which is an interesting story that I think we're going to cover when we moved up to the Perry district and how the community felt about it at that point. So.
Yeah. I tell you, I had no clue about the history, and we learned a lot at that dinner recently, and I was surprised about the amount of controversy that came with the Salvation Army. I mean, really surprised. I thought any organization coming locally not long after Spokane became a city, that they would be welcomed with open arms, but that was not necessarily the case. Share with me a little bit about what was going on back then.
Yeah, the Salvation Army, the officers marched into Spokane on August 22nd, 1891, and they held an open-air service on the corner of Riverside and Howard, where there is a plaque there still today. And that it was something that the community of Spokane had never seen anything like it before, people preaching on the streets, and they were receptive to it. But also the Salvation Army came with some evangelism that the people hadn't seen before, and they were a little bit noisy. They had tambourines and horns and drums, and they made a lot of noise in the streets of Spokane. But it was the preaching on the street, I think, that the people hadn't seen before.
Well,
I was going to say they were way ahead of their time, and they were doing some things that people had not seen. And the middle class thought it wasn't proper for people to be out on the street preaching and not in a building. And also who they were working with. It wasn't just preaching, it was also trying to help these people socially.
Yeah, and in Spokane, back then, we think of Las Vegas today as being Sin City, but somehow Spokane had garnered a reputation of its own being its own Sin City, which I'm sure there must have been some amount of conviction brought upon the area, because like you suggested, Kelly, that they weren't just holding their salvation message and preaching the word of Jesus Christ inside a building. They were actually standing out, and as Sheila, you said, they were loud.
They were loud. And also, Spokane was recovering only 2 years into the Great Fire of 1889. And so in 1891, the city was recovering, and the people were looking for some salvation or some positive things to happen in their lives. And at the time, the Salvation Army was bringing that to Spokane, but then it slowly kind of turned into a negative, just with the things that were happening during that time.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if Spokane was necessarily any more of a Sin City than anywhere else. It was just the time. Where they were was where the saloons were, the gambling houses, where prostitutes hung out, and it was just like all the wrong people.
Yeah.
Or
And
all the right people.
Yeah. And the other thing that I was unaware of, that somebody took such a disliking to the Salvation Army, they decided to take it out on a particular officer. Could you tell a little bit
Right.
about that story?
Yeah, Ida Bennett was one of the first captains that was assigned to Spokane, and the Salvation Army women were wearing these nice, tidy, professional uniforms in their bonnets, and they were trained to be very social because they were dealing with the public. And so men had a liking to these women that was unnatural. And Ida Bennett had a man who was married who fell in love with her, and it was an unrequited love for him. She was an officer. She said, I'm sorry, this isn't going to happen. And so one day he went up to her and he shot her, and then turned the gun on himself and killed himself, and took both of their lives. And she was called at that time the martyr of Spokane, because she was so well liked. And I just recently Googled an article about her from San Francisco, which is where she came from before she came to Spokane, telling about her life. And she was just such a remarkable woman. And the Salvation Army at the time, after she passed away, after he killed her, was just devastated.
Wow, wow. So
It did also bring a lot of good press, though. I mean, not in a good way, but the city, it's well known that the papers at that point sort of came alongside the Salvation Army and mourned, because today where something like that might not even make the local paper, or at least not nationally, it was huge news back then.
Right.
So something good started coming out of even
something
her
bad.
murder.
Right.
I guess my question is now, we were famous for a particular creed, something to do with soup and salvation. What was it?
Soap, and salvation.
Soap and salvation.
Right.
So this is what I love about an organization like the Salvation Armies. There's a lot of great organizations, but many of them want to come along and just meet your natural needs.
Right.
Find housing or find money for you to go to the dentist. But what I love about the Salvation Army is that they see us as a complete person, body, soul, and spirit, that we have a spiritual need within us. So this was kind of the mission that they came with, that we're here to help the poor. We're also wanting to help the poor of their spirit,
Right.
too, and bring them out of some of the issues that they've been struggling with, correct?
Well, the thought process goes back to the original founders, Booth, in England. He was dealing with the poorest of the poor of the poor. And the thought was you can't really bring someone salvation unless they've had something to eat and unless they've been cleaned.
Yes.
And so it's what you just said, it's really treating the whole person as opposed to a symptom. And treating the whole person comes with the salvation, because once you've received the salvation, well, then you've been cleaned on the inside as well.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know that over the years, as things started to progress, there was a better relationship developed between the Salvation Army and the city and the whole area of Spokane. And I believe even at one point, the Spokane County was giving the Salvation Army $5 a month to help out in their mission, correct?
Right, for the Haven, which was in Hilliard. So there was another division of the Salvation Army in Hilliard, and it just, was an offshoot of what was happening downtown, because Hilliard was a booming part of town as well back in that day. So $5 went a long ways to help
Yeah.
the people back then.
Yeah, and then tell me about the Liberty House. Was this the?
The Liberty House was over on the outskirts of Spokane by Liberty Park.
Well, Liberty House actually started downtown,
Okay.
and it burned down, and it moved. I find this quite interesting. Moved up to the Perry district, which is today, of course, is being reborn, and people want to live in the Perry district. At that point, it was one of the socially higher-ranking parts of the city, and what they did there is they had unwed mothers, children that didn't have a place to live, convicts, so forth. And the good people of Liberty Park, Liberty area, didn't like that and found it uncomfortable. So they brought a lawsuit, and actually the Salvation Army was lost and had to move. But out of that, what was our next building that we built? That was the
Was the Luigi's building
Luigi's
downtown.
building.
Yeah.
So again, good came out of bad.
So things really haven't changed. It's funny. Our human nature is that anything that creates concern in our neighborhood. I mean, even today, we don't want to have that veterans home or even assisted living facilities. We tend to struggle with. And here, the Salvation Army was just trying to meet the needs and keep these young
Right.
women off the streets and helping the orphans and the things that are really very scripturally sound
Right.
about how we're supposed to care for them. And there was pushback, so we lost the fight legally, and so they had to move, and then they came
Right.
downtown. Was
Yes.
that it you're
Right, and
saying?
one of the reasons that the Liberty Home was closed was they called it the class of inmates. They didn't like the class of the women who were there, and they actually even complained about crying babies and women in labor, that they could hear it in their neighborhood. And I thought that was such a strange thing to have written about the Liberty House. And once again, the Salvation Army is too noisy.
Wow.
That was going back to that thing of what we're trying to do and the social service that we're trying to provide, but we're getting pushback all the time.
Wow. But the Salvation Army, thank goodness, didn't quit,
No.
even though they lost that battle in the legal courts. But I wanted to switch. How did the Salvation Army help during World War I?
Well, the Salvation Army really is famous for their donuts during the war and their lassies. And we celebrate National Donut Day every first Friday in June, and people don't realize that the Salvation Army really started that. And the lassies would go right there onto the front lines and, boil donuts in Army helmets and in these pots, and they would give out coffee and donuts for free. And I have so many people who give to the Salvation Army, war veterans, who tell me the reason why they give to the Salvation Army is because of the treatment that they had and the special way that they felt from the Salvation Army during the war. It's just a
Some
phenomenon.
of the strongest advocates after the war were the veterans returning, because actually the Salvation Army sent 30,000, and they were called lassies or donut girls, and they were right up on the front.
Mm-hmm.
And not only did they provide things like donuts or care, but they would talk to these young men, they would hold services, they would hold their hand, they would be with them, and that's what they needed.
Yes, it is. Even today, we find it's that personal touch that we need when people are going through times of stress. And the Salvation Army figured that out and said, "How can we meet these needs?" And they weren't getting, they weren't paid by the government to do
No.
that. This was just truly a ministry of love for all these young women, and the work behind doing thousands and thousands and thousands of simple things like donuts. It's just
Yes.
amazing to me.
We celebrated Donut Day yesterday as well.
Somebody brought donuts to our executive board meeting.
I
So
try to celebrate Donut Day often.
My birthday tends to land on Donut Day every once in a while, so what a great excuse. So okay, going back, the Salvation Army found a permanent home in downtown Spokane in the early, 1920s area. And then, but about that time, the Salvation Army purchased some lake property. So what was going on with that?
yes, our beloved Camp Gifford. It was originally called Camp Cougar, but some parents felt that was a scary name for children going to camp, naming a camp after a predatory animal. So there was a officer named Commander Gifford, and so they eventually then named the camp after him.
That's awesome, which it still operates today, correct?
Oh, yes, yeah.
It is. I think it's important to know, again, part of the fabric of the Salvation Army. Even today, somewhere around, I think 500, is that correct? Campers go there every single year, and probably 90% plus are on a scholarship.
Right.
Yes.
In other words, they would not have the opportunity to have a camp experience if it were not for the Salvation Army.
And changing lives, too, of
And
these
changing
children.
lives.
Yes.
Some of these kids get saved there, but just the whole idea of having, all kids want that week where they can have fun with playing in the water.
Right.
Yep.
And it's still up and running today. It's the oldest camp, I think, in Washington.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. All right, switching subjects a little bit. When did you move to your current location on East Indiana, where we see not just a building, a kind of a campus? When did that happen?
Right. In 1972, we did a capital campaign. We had a very strong board back then of individuals. John T. Little was very famous in Spokane for his hardware store downtown, and just came together and did a capital campaign and built the building that we occupy in today back in 1972. And it's grown from, a little 2-acre campus to now a full 6-acre campus with wraparound services, which is what we call, you can walk in the Salvation Army with absolutely nothing and get every service that you need to, better your life.
Yeah.
That's somewhat unusual. Salvation Armies have different callings in different cities. Ours is social services. And it's unusual to have all of that capacity or capability in one place.
Yeah.
And that was the vision of the board way back in the early 70s.
Right.
Yeah, that whole one-stop shop, because people
Right.
have varieties of needs, and the world's become
And
complicated.
we're still working on that today.
Yes.
I think we're going to talk about that.
Yeah. So during the 80s and 90s, it was a time of growth for the Salvation Army, and I know that there was you had a former nursing home or something that you purchased, and it became a safe house, or.
Right. We had the William Booth Hospital, which is on West Garland, still standing today. And then we opened a family shelter, emergency shelter, in an old building there across the street from the courthouse, which I believe now is attorneys occupy that. But we were there for quite some time, and it was a family environment. There were rooms, but a communal kitchen. So all the families ate together for every meal. It was a wonderful place, but we outgrew it. So we now have the old Sturm Heating Building. We have 18 units, studio apartments up there for homeless families to live in.
Wow, that's incredible.
It's an unusual facility as well because, at least it's the only one that I know of, where if you're a single father with children, you might not necessarily be able to find a place.
Right.
Or if it's a man and a woman and 2 kids, then they often separate the father out.
Yes.
We'll take a father with children, we'll take a grandmother with children, we'll take whoever.
Right. We are a family campus. We only take families and couples, and we are the only agency in Spokane that takes single fathers with children or teenagers.
Wow, which is needed. It's
Yes.
no longer just a mom and kids, many times the dad kids. So how is this capital, we're still in the middle of kind of a capital campaign, how is that going right now, and what are the next steps?
Right. We have a vacant property out there on Ruby in Indiana, and we want to expand our campus somehow. So our advisory board participated in a needs assessment over the past 2 years, and we determined there were some new needs in Spokane, filling some gaps in Spokane that for people that aren't being met right now.
And tell me a little bit about Sally's House, as we wrap up the next few minutes.
Well, it's one of my passions,
Yes.
and I think it is to everybody that knows about it. What's unusual, well, there are a lot of unusual things about Sally's House. One is how few people really know about it. But simply put, Sally's House is a place where when the police officers unfortunately have to kick down the door at 4 o'clock in the morning at a meth house, and they find 2 little children there, what do you do with them? And Sally's House came about by a little girl who went through that experience and says, who loves me because she's sitting in a police car. So we will take these children who don't have anywhere to go, including siblings, because often the only person who's ever loved them is their sibling. And they come to Sally's House, which does not have an address, and they're loved, maybe for the first time, and they're cleaned up, and we take care of them. The purpose of it, though, is we keep them for long enough so that the regular social services agencies, DHSH, have enough time to find a good placement for them as opposed to just putting them somewhere.
Yeah. Let's move on to the concept that we live in a city that it has 4 seasons, including our wintertime season, and you provide a variety of services and facilities. How does winter change things these days with the Salvation Army?
Well, the warming center has grown tremendously in Spokane County. And this year, the Salvation Army will be taking the families. So we're gearing up, working with the city on a contract to, with Family Promise, to have the families will go to Family Promise during the day, and then they'll come to the Salvation Army at night. And we're prepared to welcome those families into a nice, warm place. And then also, wintertime brings red kettles. We'll be dropping our red kettles the Friday before Thanksgiving this year, and giving about 250 people in Spokane a nice job for Christmas.
Yeah, so we actually have a lot of opportunities. I'm going to throw this in, it wasn't exactly in the script, but for volunteers to come and help out, right, with the Salvation Army, especially when we're having this expanded warming center, and you have to have people there kind of monitoring for a few hours at a time all night long. So if somebody wants to come and if they like staying up half the night, they could come and help out, correct?
Yes, certainly. The volunteers are the backbone of any organization, and for us they're very, very important, and we value our volunteers very much. I mean, you two are considered volunteers as board members. You participate in our backpack distribution and Christmas time and any other of the events that we have. So volunteers are very, very important.
I love working the backpack. I love the backpack
I would
distribution.
say volunteers are so incredibly important, and we have lots of need. I don't know if we're going to talk about this, but we have the largest food bank in the Inland Northwest. I mean, we have lots and lots of programs where there's a need for people, not just economically, which is always helpful as well, but with their time.
Right.
Yeah, so there's so many opportunities on even one-time events. People could come like the backpack distribution, or at Christmas time if they don't need a job and just want to help ring a bell, they can sign up for that. And then there's ongoing, if they want to be a little more regular about their volunteer opportunities, they can do that. So really there's so many areas that they could work in, out. They could find a niche for just about anybody, any personality to come down and help, right?
Yes, and just go to our website, makingspokanebetter.com, and all of our volunteer opportunities are on there.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the needs of the poor and homeless, I'd like to circle back to your relationship with Spokane County. We're proud to support the great work of the Salvation Army in helping the vulnerable individuals and families throughout the county. For example, the county allocates funds through a competitive request for proposal process, which is based on the high priority needs identified in the Spokane County and City of Spokane's consolidated plan strategies. So what does the future hold for the Spokane County Salvation Army? And are we still, I'm continuing that partnership, I take it?
Yes, and funding in Spokane is very competitive. There are a lot of very good, solid working nonprofit agencies, and it's a matter of writing a good grant and showing what the need is. And we're anticipating a nice CDBG grant coming our way to replace the sidewalks around our campus. They're old and crumbling, and so we're very excited that the county awarded us.
Could you explain CBGD?
Community Development Block Grant.
Thank you.
So it's a neighborhood thing that the county does, and we were awarded those funds, and it's our first time, and we're very excited to continue that relationship.
So I know that the Salvation Army, when it comes to their funds, because you guys, I know as being a part of the advisory board also, that we're really trying to meet the entire needs, a full one-stop shop, and be a provider. And if we don't provide the services, get people into the areas where they can receive that. And it costs money. I mean, to put these people up and to have the warming center and Sally's house and all this. So you raise a lot of funds on your own, no doubt about it, through the kettle drives, through other capital campaign. So there's a lot of private money. But at the same time, it's important that we continue to partner through the county, through the city. And I also know even at the state level, we're legislating for additional funds to come down. I know we received extra funds for Sally's house in the past. So you're saying this is really not just a we're doing it all by ourselves. We really need the team of the whole city and individuals to continue to make the Salvation Army successful so they can help
Right.
those who need help.
Yeah, and Sally's House wouldn't be here today without that partnership with Children's Administration in Olympia. You know, they fund about 3/4 of that program, and we can't do it without those funds. And, you know, Sally's House does receive a lot of donations, but if that money ever went away, then Sally's House would go away as well. We do not want that to happen. It cannot happen
Yeah, because
for
there's
those children.
no other place in Spokane that meets
No.
that particular need.
Except for the CPS office where the children sit on a chair and
Yeah.
watch the
Yeah.
you know, case manager call and call and call and be rejected by foster families, and that child is going to sit there, and that's the story
Yeah.
that Kelly was
trauma
telling.
on top of trauma.
Right.
And so,
I think it's important to point out here, we started out with, you know, why do I like the Salvation Army? Well, one of the reasons is, you know, our books are open. And in today's giving environment, people want results. They want to know that their dollars are being used in appropriate and proper ways. The Salvation Army runs incredibly lean. And all of these programs that we're talking about, typically we're losing money on them, even with the grants that we receive. And so we're making that up with our own funds.
Yeah, and we're lucky enough to be a part of an international nonprofit agency, so we have that support from the International Salvation Army to continue on in Spokane.
yeah.
Salvation Army is a multi-billion-dollar organization.
Yeah, it's a great organization. I am so honored to be a part of it. And so congratulations and thank you both for everything the Salvation Army has done and how you continue to serve the community. I'm afraid that we're out of time, and I'd like to thank both of you, my guests, Salvation Army Advisory Board Chair Kelly Briggles and Business Administrator Sheila Garrity. I'm County Commissioner Nancy McLaughlin. I just want to thank you both again for joining Spokane County Spotlight.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.